Hi, welcome to Sussex Pioneers. I am Maria Bedoya, Research and Insight Coordinator. This episode is called People, Planet, Profit, and it's designed to help you identify the true opportunities behind the triple bottom line. What is innovation for, if not to make positive change for our community and our world? In this episode, we'll look at how business can be used as a force for good, environmentally and socially. We'll hear from our innovators about how they have embedded sustainable practices and how that, in turn, has helped to grow their business. Let's hear now from Paul Nightingale, Professor of Strategy at the University of Sussex Business School, talking about sustainable development.
The global community has been speaking about the need for sustainable development with an increasing urgency since the 1970s. Now, with our impact on the world more visible than ever before, responsible businesses can no longer afford to ignore sustainability. The triple bottom line is an important shift away from this thinking just in terms of economic impact, because it recognises how profit, people and planet interact with each other. The bottom line is no longer just financial. It's about the quality of life of stakeholders and the environmental footprint of the business. Many of these issues overlap. For example, the consumption of resources affects profit and planet, while the health, well-being and security of employees affects profit and people. The triple bottom line can make decision-making far more complex. Innovation has always involved risk and uncertainty, but now it involves an additional element of ambiguity. Is the end goal of our innovation project to increase profits, reduce our carbon footprint, support a marginalised group, improve customer health or community well-being? Or is it a combination of multiple goals? And how do we manage those competing priorities? A good place to start is by thinking about the approach you may take. You might seek to reduce harm by becoming more efficient, doing the same thing better and reducing waste. You might take things a step further and create shared value by developing new products, doing good by doing new things. Or you might contribute to wider societal change by working to build new systems, doing good by doing things with others. If your business is already well equipped to handle the complexity of innovation management, it should be up to these new challenges. Developing cleaner products, more efficient processes, or more responsible practices will involve many of the same strategies we've already covered during this series. It's still a case of articulating a clear vision of the impact you want to achieve, then identifying the tactics you will use to achieve it and the metrics you will use to measure it. However, a commitment to sustainability does require a shift in perspective. Instead of an inward focus, we must now instead think how we can work collaboratively to drive institutional change. This episode's innovation stories explore businesses that have leveraged their position to do just that.
Trying to engage the consumers about why farmers aren't necessarily wrecking the planet. My granddad was paid to pull the hedges out because the world was hungry, and I spent 30 years getting beaten up saying that we're just bad, and it's about trying to communicate to people and try and talk a language that they understand. Regenerative agriculture is a really, really cool thing, and it really inspires people, and we try and just tell that story within the beer that we make.
We're so sustainable because we're on the farm, and the farm grows or produces most of our ingredients. Our barley is grown by Duncan. Our water comes from underneath where we're standing now. We then treat that water when we're brewing beer, and that water is reused on the farm. We generate our own electricity on solar panels, which we use again to produce our beer. We use heat exchangers so that any cooling or heating that is done, we're either chilling down liquid or heating it up using heat exchangers. So we're very, very energy efficient. And our waste product?
Yeah, our waste product we feed to all our cows and the sheep. It's delicious. It gives them amazing bloom. I don't forget the way that we grow carbon before planting the barley is a really important part of the story. The regenerative thing is about permanent soil cover. I think that makes a real point of difference about trying to create just worm food and bird food before planting barley that then ends up in the beer.
And the other important thing is with our beer, we don't use single-use containers like so many breweries do, and they send out 35 pints in a plastic container, use it once, chuck it away. everything we send out is in a metal container that comes back to us and we reuse it 100 times, 200 times. So we are as green and sustainable as you possibly can be, which is why we won the Sussex Green Business of the Year award in 2019. People are caring more and they're more interested and they're genuinely concerned about the planet. And getting this message across is easier. And we just want people to understand that Longman beer is sustainable.
My name is Richard Harding and I'm an agronomist. So basically I advise farmers and landowners how to manage their farms in a more regenerative way. So the problem that farmers face is that we can no longer continue doing what we're doing. So we're getting increased soil erosion, pollution through the chemistry that we're using, and just a loss of biodiversity. So we're changing our system to a more regenerative system, which focuses on diversity, taking inspiration from nature and regenerating the soils. So I've got two samples of soil here, one from a regenerative system and one from a conventional system. And you can see this one has degraded and has no smell at all, so it's biologically inert, whereas this one has a really healthy, vibrant smell. So the field we're studying, we're taking inspiration from nature, and the innovation comes from replacing steel, which most farmers would normally use to cultivate the soil. We're using plant species to actually do the work for us. We're also using different plant species, so we're using legumes to produce nitrogen, which most farmers buy their nitrogen, and it's a source of pollution, and it's also a very carbon intensive process. And for most farms, they will have a shed full of machinery. So they'll have large tractors, they'll have cultivators. And what we're doing is we have a shed full of seed and we go in and we choose the plant species. So one of the biggest challenges to adopting regenerative agriculture is nothing to do with the techniques. It's all to do with the psychology of change, peer pressure, and also the way that we conduct research. Traditionally, if we start with research, that's very much focused on top-down research. And with regenerative agriculture, the only people that are going to benefit from the research are the farmers. So therefore, it requires a completely different approach. So we're looking at peer-to-peer research and site-specific to the farm, because every farm is unique. So we focus on bottom-up research rather than top-down research. Secondly, change management is crucial, and people's attitude to risk in terms of what they're willing to accept. And I think with farmers, depending on the size, depending on the structure of the farm or the debt profile of the farm, it's doing system change that's in tune with those things. So it's doing it on a level that the farmer is comfortable with.
There's a lot of focus on planting trees, and trees are great, we love trees, plant lots of trees, right? But actually, compare it to that single concrete mixer. It would take the Amex football stadium full of mature trees 2 years to absorb the CO2 in that single truck. Concrete alone is responsible for 8% of global CO2 emissions in a single material. Traditional asphalt will be produced using primary aggregate, or virgin aggregate as it's known. And in Sussex, there's not a huge amount of quarries, typically granite or limestone. So you're talking about trucking stuff from Derbyshire or from Frome in Somerset as typically being the two closest places. So that's not a great amount of haulage, either road or rail or a combination of the two. The cold asphalt that we make here can have 100% recycled aggregate that comes from our own urban quarry or from other sources of recycled aggregate. In fact, it could come from the same road and go back into the same road. So the circular economy is really about reusing materials from a job in a most basic form as you possibly can. And I think our depot here is a great example of the circular economy, because people literally drive around it in a circle. So a small builder, for example, might be rebuilding your patio. He'll dig out the old concrete patio, he'll bring it here, drop it off free of charge. Saves him a lot of money having to pay for a tip now. Most tips are charging for hardcore, even if it's clean stuff. And then in the same depot, he can pick up the new stone, the reprocessed, recycled concrete from the guy that tipped it yesterday, and use that to rebuild his new patio. Or he can pick up a load of recycled concrete or a load of recycled tarmac that needs to go into that new project that he's building.
So let's meet our amazing sustainable innovators. Could you introduce yourselves?
Hello, I'm Duncan Ellis. I'm a third generation farmer. really passionate about regenerative agriculture and the director of the Longman Brewery.
Hi, I'm Steve Creed. I'm a sustainability coach mentor. I've been in sustainability for about 25 years now, and I tend to work with smaller businesses that want to integrate sustainability into their business plans.
Hello, I'm Stephen Lees from the Longman Brewery, one of Sussex's most sustainable companies. I've got 30 years experience in the beer industry.
I'm James from Roadways. We're a highways maintenance and civil engineering contractor, but we also produce a range of low carbon recycled highways materials as well.
Thanks ever so much. So the first question I want to throw out to our discussion today is, why is it important to your businesses to have sustainability and innovations in sustainability? Surely it'd just be easier not to.
Who starts?
Well, it would be easier not to, but I think if everybody ignored the issue, we'd be in an even worse place than we are now.
That's fair. Yeah, things are not necessarily going in the right direction.
Certainly not, and we've all got to make a stand and do our bit.
I think with construction and the built environment contributing globally to 40% of all CO2 emissions, you can't be in construction and not be in sustainability.
Right. So what would you say to the other businesses that do the same things that you do that aren't being sustainable? Surely they're making more money at the moment, are they?
I'm not sure. I think there's a lot of benefits to be had from, particularly in the farming industry, where we can look at a no-till environment, where we can we basically replace steel with roots, and we can basically grow carbon, and there's an awful lot of energy to be saved, and also carbon to be traded and all sorts. So I think it's a really interesting new business.
Yeah, it definitely is. And you mentioned no-tilling. I mean, growing agriculture is one of the key ways that we're going to be able to actually sequestrate, which means store carbon extracted from the air. And big challenge that the government has set for ourselves in terms of their 2050 targets. They're relying quite a lot on technical extraction solutions, and those are not very well proven yet. So the more we can do with farming to reduce the amount of carbon that's in the atmosphere by growing things.
Yeah.
But it's not rocket science, and I think we're really mimicking what they did 50 years ago. I think we've been too reliant on chemistry for the last 50 years, and just going back to basics and understanding what we're trying to do.
Well, it's interesting because your agronomist, Richard, we just saw in there, was explaining about the psychology of change. How much of that is a barrier to what you're trying to do?
In construction, it's huge. I mean, construction hasn't experienced any significant change for 30 or 40 years,
Right.
and not all the sustainable solutions involve doing anything particularly weird and wacky. There's some
Right.
fairly basic low carbon materials that you can use that are already British standards. They don't involve, 10 years research and development and huge investment. They just involve it being a different colour. and that's a real challenge for a lot of people that have always seen concrete being that exact shade of concrete.
Yeah. What colour is it then?
It's an off-white, isn't it? It's a creamy off-white,
I can verify that though, because I used to be the director for the environment for a major construction company
Right.
about 25 years ago, when we first introduced environmental assessment and then sustainability into the program. And the biggest challenge there was how you changed people's minds. And one of the most interesting experience I had was something called Natural Step, where they had 5, I guess they were kind of covenants that you followed in order to ensure that you weren't going to cause problems for the future.
Right.
And we took a whole group of people through that when we were building a large hospital and said, let's change the design using these principles. The innovation happens when you have to do something differently.
Yeah.
And so we took them through it. And the best comment I had was one of the really hardened foremen there coming up to me after the end of the session saying, I was telling my daughter, my 18-year-old daughter, about this, and it's the first time that she's actually been interested in anything that I do at work. Yeah.
Do you remember what the 5 principles are?
Well, they are that we're not going to extract more than we need.
Great.
We're not going to put any chemicals in the earth that it can't process. We're going to make sure that we regenerate whatever we can, and we're going to share things.
Yeah.
With change, I think it comes trust as well. And I think in construction, it's a really brutal industry. There's lots of chicanery and, lots of sort of wide practices over the years. And as a result, there's a very low levels of trust, I would say, between different people in the supply chain. And then if you're asking people to change and to try new things, how do I know it's not rubbish? Because last time Fred tried to sell me something different, it fell to pieces.
It's similar in beer. How do we get the message across to people that the beer you're drinking has been grown in that field sustainably? The water is from under the ground by the brewery, and all the different aspects. The electricity is generated on the farm by solar panels. All the spent grain goes to the animals. How do we get that message
To people really
over to the
believe you.
person who stood at the bar going, what beer shall I have?
Yeah.
It's communicating that message. That's the hard part.
I was just going to say, I think this is where system thinking comes into it all. The biggest challenge that we face is that everything is interconnected, and I know there's a lot of government departments, but it's what we all do every day as well. And so one of the things that circular economy brings to this whole challenge is the fact that it insists on thinking about a system rather than just one point in a supply chain or one piece over here, and recognizing that both rewilding and sustainable farming have a coexistence. They're sort of like yin and yang of something that's going to deliver the general outcome. And the more we can help people to understand that their actions are going to make difference in other places that they're not necessarily aware, like the brewer who may have to pay more actually in the future to get rid of all those plastic containers, and so might actually realize that in the long run, you're a much better option than someone who's giving him all this plastic he has to pay to get rid of.
Steve, can you just break down for me what, in layman's terms, what's a circular economy?
So circular economy comes from the basic concept that it's like nature. There's no waste in nature. If you think about it, you go in the forest, there's a big tree growing, there's a little tree, there's a rotting tree. The rotting tree becomes the nutrients for the next tree, and everything keeps going around. So there's no waste. So a circular economy is about not having waste, and that leads us into thinking about how do we design things, like you're using metal containers rather than plastic because you can reuse them lots of times, so you've designed your delivery route to not create waste and to make it last longer, right through to what we do with the things that we have that are left. So ultimately, I assume they made of a high aluminum content.
Well,
they could probably be melted down and reused again if they're getting too bashed up.
Yeah, there is, but there's every aspect of that cycle for
Absolutely.
us. At the brewery, one of our biggest aims that Duncan, has led on is our own water, and that's treated and reused. All our spent grain is fed to livestock. There is no wastage. There is a full cycle.
James, you should share with us what you do with your water, because that's a really interesting thing.
All right, that's a bit of mad chemistry. Yes. So when you make cement, you heat limestone, and it sort of there's a conversion of the calcium, and it becomes cement, not limestone anymore. And in the process of doing that, it gives off huge amounts of CO2. So the problem with concrete is not just the energy used to heat the limestone, but it's actually there's genuine CO2 given off as part of that reaction. So we produce concrete, and then at the end of the day, you wash out your concrete truck into a pit. So that water is basically cement water. It's highly alkaline, so it's basically hazardous waste, and we can't reuse it because it would rot all the rubbers and things in our machinery. Obviously, it would not good to the environment either. So what we do is bizarrely, we reverse that chemical process. So we add CO2 gas back into the water, and it turns it back into limestone, and you can actually see it happening.
So does anyone ever, James, do you have any conflicts sometimes around what clients want and need, and what you need to produce and what's available?
Yeah, so we're a small business, and we can be very flexible and very dynamic and very responsive to the sort of problems in the problems in the world or the market, and we'll take a very pragmatic approach to prioritising opportunities around carbon saving or cost saving or innovation or whatever it is. But some of our clients, especially those in the public sector, are a little bit more structural, deeply structured. And they'll have a target from central government that's cascaded to local government, and that's all they're focused on. So, for example, if we're talking about carbon saving, we've identified asphalt, for example, as being a big problem in terms of carbon.
Yeah.
And you'll talk to the client, and you'll say, we can save you a million car kilometres of CO2 by changing the kind of asphalt that we use.
Yeah.
And the kind of client will look at you blankly, and he say, well, I don't see anything about asphalt in my targets. but if you've got an electric van, that would be amazing. Well, I only drive, 10,000 miles a year in my van. I've just offered you 1 million miles a year of saving if we can just fiddle with the well, that sounds great, but it's not going to help me with my objectives.
James, is it because they set a specific requirement for a thing rather than an outcome?
Absolutely.
Because the whole challenge here is that in tendering, to get the best innovation, people should be setting an outcome, not a thing. So they shouldn't say, I want this kind of asphalt. They should say, I want it to be this temperature, I want it to be this sort of surface, and give the definition of what they'd like rather than what they think they want. Yeah, and that's a really challenging thing in government spec, particularly in my experience.
Henry Ford said if I'd asked them, they'd have said faster horses.
Yeah.
So I'm interested, can you give me some top tips? I'm a business, I want to be more sustainable, or I want to be a business that's known for sustainability. What are some of the things I need to look out for? What's my first steps?
Well, we wanted to be known for sustainability. So being on the farm, there's our biggest raw ingredient grown in the field next door. We knew that there was an aquifer under the brewery where we could bring up water, which again hasn't been treated, hasn't gone through pumps and pipes and all the different processes. We had the livestock there for the spent grain. We knew that all the bits of the jigsaw were there.
Right.
And all we had to do was put them together.
Right, okay.
I was just going to say, for a more general approach for a business, I sometimes talk to people about what they might do. And I don't know if you've heard of the circle of influence. It's a concept in business where you start by saying, well, what are all my concerns? So you could sit down with somebody. This is more general. But if you're a small business thinking about this, just sit down and write a list of concerns that you have that are related to your business and sustainability. And then look at the ones that you're actually in control of.
Right.
Because if you can control it, like you're describing, then you can do something with it. And it shouldn't be too difficult to make the change. There's things that you can influence, like maybe how the packaging comes from your supplier. You can maybe get them to change that, so there's influence. And then there's the things that they're just in your concern list, but you can't actually do anything about yet. And if you think about it that way, it's an easy way to quickly refine down from a very simple point of view, the starting point, and then you can start to develop, as we've had from James, a more complex way of actually scoring the ones that you've got some chance of doing something about. So I would recommend a really simple sit down and just have a little brainstorm with your team and think about it like that. It's the best way to do it.
I'd agree with it, and I've listened to people who've been very successful in various fields that they've excelled in, and it's all about vision. It's about understanding where you want to get to, and then once you can do that and make a project around that, then it's a lot easier to go towards. If you're like, you don't know where you're going, and just like, let's just go over here, go over here, go over here, but let's just set out what's the 5-year, what's the 10-year, what's the 30-year goal, and let's try and everything we do has to get to that point there, and it suddenly then targets, narrows down you can take the low hanging fruit to start with, the quick wins, and then with the idea just to basically the bigger picture stuff can kind of comes with just time and practice, but it's just about understanding what that point looks like.
James?
I think in identifying opportunities for sustainability, you've got to look at the area that's going to give you the biggest bang for your buck. And I would say look a bit broader than your immediate business. So some of our competitors, for example, they see their job as to drive a van, pick up some tarmac, put it in a pothole, right? So how could they do that differently? I could do it with an electric van. Yeah, that's not a bad idea. But actually, why don't you pick up a different type of tarmac that might save 1,000 times more impact than just doing it in an electric van? So I'd say don't constrain yourself to your immediate business, but look at the kind of next door things that could actually have a bigger impact than some of the things you might think you've got a direct control over now.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It feels like what I've heard today is that if you're a business out there who wants to be known for sustainability or wants to increase their reputation and their processes around sustainability, you need to do your homework. You need to do a simple tool which makes it easier, the journey for you. You need to think about it commercially and make sure that it makes sense. And then you need to get the message out there that this is something that you're doing because that's what the next generation are looking for, essentially.
Sustainability is important to King & McGaw for two main reasons. One, there's a moral imperative to minimise our impact on the environment, but also it's increasingly customer driven. They are very focused on sustainability and are exerting pressure on us to reduce plastic packaging and so on and so forth. Plus the customer demographic that we are targeting in our retail sales are very environmentally aware, and so they also expect us to minimise packaging, minimise plastic usage, etc.
The biggest innovations came when we stopped using offset litho print. Essentially, when you do a publication with offset litho, you really have to print between 2,000 and 5,000 prints and put them on a shelf. You never know whether you're going to sell those prints or not, so you have inevitably a lot of wastage. But we certainly have saved the world a lot of paper in being able to print on demand. And I think that was the single biggest innovation, as well as the fact that you could do pre-press in your own studio on the computer, whereas in the past it used to have to go out to a reproduction house. So all of those things have really helped push us forwards. Whether or not they will remain that way is difficult to know, because now the industry is moving on even further and it's doing non-fungible tokens. Whether or not that's a good thing, I don't know. It's certainly a very expensive process in terms of the environment.
We've got a number of examples of where we've made changes. Corners for the frames is one example where we were using an injection moulded piece of plastic, 4 per frame, and we moved away from that to a pulp-based replacement. We use, instead of cellophane bags, we use a biofilm bag, which is made from cornstarch, I believe. We're currently working on a project to replace MDF. So we resolved a few months ago to replace it with a solid core card. And we've invested in a new digital cutter to enable us to work that material. The material will be cut in a different way, so it won't produce dust in the workplace. Plus the offcuts will go in with our mixed cardboard recycling.
So my big life mission is to enable people to be authentically themselves, to be free to be who they are. And Just Helpers and Justly speak into the economic part of that. So through Justly in particular, we will build a community of ethical business owners that can pay their people the real living wage, because we're helping to reduce their overhead costs. We will influence each other in terms of best practice and share resources. Why reinvent the wheel at this stage? And finally, we will enable our workforce to be able to thrive in the towns and the cities that they live and work in as well.
So we did have a few incidents where, including myself, I was thrown out of the site once just because I couldn't accept that my guys are being put at risk and that environmental issues are not being addressed. And I spoke. They just asked me to leave the site because I'm not qualified enough. Despite the fact they didn't even bother to understand that I have a master's in civil engineering, that I am owner of one of the largest contractors in Southeast. Yes, it's just not comfortable questions and a woman on site.
So welcome back to our second conversation, which is about social impact. And we welcome Nigel. Nigel, could you introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Nigel Lamb. I'm Chief Executive of Sussex Innovation, which is the business incubator owned by the University of Sussex.
Perfect. You're very welcome, Nigel. Thank you. Okay, so I want to dig into social impact. Do your businesses have a social impact? And if so, how does it serve your business?
Farming, with my farming hat on, we spent 50 years farming in a way which we think is no longer sustainable. And it's about trying to understand a new way of farming that can engage another generation to take on the mantle, to try and challenge what we've done for 50 years and see whether that's can that create a better, more efficient way of doing things.
farming is probably ahead of construction, I think, in terms of becoming less labour dependent and more automated. Most of what we sell is very sort of based around people installing it and people delivering it. So I don't really sell asphalt or concrete, but I sell the way that we install it, and it's the finished product that is created by people. So people for us are everything, and construction. There's a lot of skills that are lacking, and there's a lot of training that you have to do, and we feel very sort of rewarded where we take people in that are perhaps 35 but still not earning a huge amount, and we upskill them in some of the sort of specialist trades, and they can be earning sort of 40% more than the Sussex average in a couple of years. So that's quite rewarding to see, and obviously the individuals, it provides big benefits to them and their families as well.
Can I ask then, because we talk a lot about the importance of people in a business and how we're treating them better and developing them over time is so critical. How do you innovate in your people skills in your business? How do you innovate in your people process and how you manage?
I think management's it's all about caring and being respected as well. But innovation-wise, we spend a lot of money training people. We send people away on courses, and in our brew house, everyone is overqualified, which is fantastic. They really know what they're doing, and they've got qualifications that cost a lot of money to do, and we've paid for that.
But I think on top of that, Steve, we've employed people who've come from other businesses, they've had other career paths and wanted to come and join us because it's cool and fun, and that brings experience, and they all have different benefits.
Yeah, we've taken a lot of people from other industries into construction, which isn't something that's happened very much in construction, and it's caused some friction in the industry.
Can you give me an example, James?
Well, employing more women, for example.
Right.
It's not a common thing to see in construction management, let alone, so even in a site office, you wouldn't see many females, let alone out on site. And we've brought project managers with transferable project management skills, project is a project, into construction project management. And we've found that they've performed really highly and have challenged a lot of the sort of perhaps old-fashioned thinking or inefficient thinking in the sector.
It's interesting because Victoria said something about, she said a couple of things. Victoria, your partner, she said there was when you first came into it, there was elements of modern slavery, and also that she and other women in the business have been thrown off site just for being women. So does the industry really need to change, and is it your job to do it?
Yeah, so I mean, there's some really great careers in construction and some very high paying careers and a real opportunity to make a difference. But for some people, construction is still the kind of career of last resort.
Right.
And you've got some people that maybe had troubled teenage years that ended up labouring on a building site, not because they really wanted to, but someone in the pub took them under their arm and said they'd give them 20 quid a day in cash to help them on the wheelbarrow. And 10 years later, they're still getting £20 a day in cash and perhaps a place to live in the best case. And it's absolutely shocking. They're not paying taxes, they may be stuck in tied accommodation, they may be also in a sort of benefit trap, and we've taken them on and paid them real money and give them training courses, expensive training courses, and they're earning now, some of them are earning 40,000 a year, which is as a Sussex wage is a very good level. But yeah, it's amazing that you can still come across people, bosses like that are still getting away with, the cash in hand kind of system.
There's been so much research now that's shown that the companies who are all of most innovative, most sustainable, and most profitable are the ones with the greatest diversity of thinking. It's the ones who have, groups of people who come together from different backgrounds, different educational status, different gender, different religion, different nationalities. They're the ones that really, are innovative, they're creative, and that drive sustainability, and are actually also the most profitable. So, investing in, training your staff, giving them skills beyond what they need for their day-to-day job, actually that will ultimately drive profitability. It's not a cost to the business, actually it's a benefit.
It feels like a lot of effort. Somebody explain to me what greenwashing is.
Right, I'll have a go at that. So greenwashing is where you get usually a big brand shouting to everybody, advertising how fantastic they are for the planet because they're planting trees, or they're giving a load of money to certain foundations to buy some rainforest somewhere that's already there, and things like this. They're not actually making any difference to their product.
Right.
So they're passing the buck. You know, at Longman Brewery, every bit that we do, we're doing it. We're not paying someone else to do it fictitiously.
Yeah.
We're doing it.
It's been a fantastic conversation. It's really wonderful to hear how passionate you are about affecting the social impact that you have, and also the environment. What would you say are some top tips for people who are starting? Well, you understand now, I think, from this conversation, why it's a benefit commercially as well as socially. But what are the first steps? What can you advise people to do?
Be brave.
Bravery. Fantastic. What else?
Invest in the people you're working with and or who are working for you. Look after them. Without them, you won't succeed.
Right. You can have all the pie in the sky.
You can have everything, but without them, you won't succeed.
Yeah. James?
I think as rationally as you can analyse it, some of this stuff isn't tangible, and you just got to believe in the karma bank, and if you keep doing the right thing in lots of different areas, good things will happen.
Nigel, have you anything to add?
I think the first thing for me is actually it has to come from within. So do what you believe and be true to yourself.
Yeah.
And the second thing is the most obvious one. It's just start. If you think of all the amazing examples we've heard from these two businesses, it's not one big thing. It's constantly trying little things, try, fail, try, succeed, and just building and building and constantly doing it, and just doing things that you truly believe will make a difference.
Yeah. So it's engaging your passion. It's invest in your people. It's accept that it's going to be intangible sometimes. It's be brave, but ultimately just get it done.
Get it done, and I think the final thing really on that is your routes to market as well. You've got so many people that make fantastic products and have fantastic things that they're selling, but they don't know how to sell them or who to sell them to. It's all about your route to market.
Yeah, make sure it's circular, another circular economy. Fantastic, thanks ever so much, everyone.
I hope that you enjoyed that discussion. I felt there's some really interesting points around the circular economy, transition and change management, and profit and purpose. In terms of the circular economy, the panel spoke about the need to design out waste and design in recycling. It's really helpful for your business to think about your model. Think about where you can minimize waste, think about where you can reuse materials, and also think about where you can offer your materials to other businesses. So you're really creating that circular model as a whole. The panel also spoke about change management and managing transition. There are certain industries that are responsible for a huge amount of emissions. So construction and the built environment are currently responsible for 40% of carbon emissions. What's required here is a mindset shift as well as change to physical practices and systems. They also mentioned the need to build a solid vision. So as a business owner, think about where you are now, where you want your company to be, and how you plan to achieve this. Steve Creed also spoke about the centre of influence. So he spoke about making a long list of all of your concerns and all of the things that you can influence. In terms of things that you can influence, take action steps to make change here. In terms of the concerns, put them to one side and return to them at a later date and see if you can make change here. There was also the discussion around the triple bottom line, so people, purpose, planet. Many businesses in the video talked about how their customers are heavily focused on sustainability. And in order to continue to attract these customers as a business, they needed to focus on the fact that they were driving social and environmental impact. Customers are voting with their feet right now. So if you want to remain competitive and a popular brand, you're going to need to demonstrate that you as a business are driving sustainable impact. So to conclude, we are all aware that businesses need to make a profit. So you need to search for the areas within your business where you can really drive social and environmental impact and make sure there are commercial benefits to this too. This is going to perhaps differentiate you from your competitors, help you attract new customers, and also re-engage existing customers. So there are clear commercial benefits to focusing on sustainability, and it is possible to drive change and at the same time boost profit, growth and productivity. It's just about innovating in these key areas of your business.
Thanks for watching. In our next episode, we'll be talking about the value of curiosity and how to harness a creative workplace culture. Make sure you join the conversation with our business community by clicking on the Discuss button found on the Learning platform. Also, keep an eye out for the next Q&A session, where our experts will be online and ready to answer your questions around sustainable innovation.